All right, we'll go ahead and get started. This is a panel to start a conversation about how local governments can take advantage of some of the other expertise that other local governments have when it comes to oil and gas issues. This idea has sort of stemmed from a lot of conversations that I had when I was with the Department of Natural Resources with a lot of different local government representatives and other people who work with local governments about some of the challenges that people face and where do we go to get answers, and really trying to find a way to take advantage of the knowledge that we have inherent in our cohorts across the local government and state spectrum. So I want to first have each of the panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what their role is with the local government, how much oil and gas development is happening in your area, and anything else that you might want to say as introduction. So Jeff, we'll start with you.
Okay. Jeff Robbins. I'm a local government attorney. I have worked with local governments for about 20 years, assisting them in addressing oil and gas regulations and otherwise working with operators in their communities. I've most recently been working with some communities on the Front Range, Adams County. Jen's on our panel here. I've been working with Adams County. I've also recently been working with the city of Aurora, and again addressing questions and concerns from local government officials and staff as they deal with oil and gas as it approaches their communities.
All right. My name is, can you hear me here? Okay, my name is Tom Parko. I'm the Planning Services Director for Weld County. I've been with the county for about 7 years. I've been in the public sector planning field for over 15. Down in Fort Lupton did some municipal planning, and then down in Elbert County for a number of years before that. So I think you've seen all of the information, the stats about Weld County. So it's you know, I don't want to elaborate too much on that. We're a very busy county when it comes to oil and gas, and which I'll touch on and elaborate a little bit later as we talk about local government designee and the roles that we have.
And I'm Jen. Can you hear me now? Hello? Is this one on?
This one works.
All right, I'll use this one. Is this one working? So I'm Jen Rutter. I am the environmental analyst for Adams County. I wear a lot of hats. I oversee some of the land use for landfills and gravel mines, the mosquito control contract for the county, the brownfields program. I'd help administer that. I'm helping do some remediation on our old sheriff shooting range, and I also manage the oil and gas program. So that's another very new thing that we have here at the county. I started about 2 years ago, and around that same time, we started seeing increased oil and gas development, large facilities. At the time, we thought 8 wells was large, and then we started seeing 20 wells, 30 wells, 40 wells. So our perspective has changed. We've grown a lot as a county. We adopted new regulations last year. We dedicated some resources, so we now have a full oil and gas team, which includes an oil and gas liaison and an oil and gas inspector. So we've gotten a handle on a lot of those things. Just to give you an idea of kind of the development we're seeing here in Adams County. Well, here in Adams County. A lot of the development is occurring on the western side of Adams County, which is the more developed side, closer to Denver. Kind of in and amongst the city of Thornton, the city of Brighton, and Commerce City. Right in that area, we have approximately 23 well pads, each with an average of about 20 wells. So yes, it's relatively rural, but there's definitely a lot of urban development occurring in that area as well. So I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the challenges that we faced and some of the solutions that we were able to find.
Good morning. My name is Julie Murphy, and I'm currently the Assistant Director for Energy and Minerals with the Department of Natural Resources. And I've been in that role for about 2 weeks, basically. So I'm certainly finding my way. But prior to that, I served as the Hearings and Regulatory Affairs Manager at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And in that capacity, I oversaw COGCC's local government designee, local government liaison team. And so that's kind of the extent of my experience, and why I'm here is to provide support for anything that the state can do to facilitate local governments learning from each other, learning from us, and improving collaboration as it relates to oil and gas oversight. So.
Thank you. I'm Kirby Wynn. I'm Garfield County's oil and gas liaison. Garfield County created a full-time oil and gas related position. Gosh, it must be almost 15 years ago now, 13 years, something like that. It's been quite a while. I've been doing it since the end of 2011. And in that role, I mean, one of the key things that I do is to be as ever present and available as possible to our citizens. So I sort of bill myself as sort of the complaints department, and I don't mean that in some sort of a trite sort of way, but realistically, residents can call me pretty much any time of day or night if they have odor issues, lights, dust, that sort of thing. That's one of the, I guess, at a real visceral level of like, did I do something important today? That's one of the things that I focus on the most and put my energies in to make sure that people are tended to if they have an issue. I also of course, I serve and support our county commissioners and our county administration, so I'm very involved in all of the rulemakings. A lot of times the county will send me as one of the primary folks, and I work with a team of folks at times, depending on the rulemaking, our planners, etc. But I help our county commissioners shape, develop, and finalize their policy decisions on what they would like to see in terms of changing in oil and gas commission, air quality control commission rules, that sort of thing. So I help represent the county in that way. And as I go around the state and do those sort of things and work closely with the Oil and Gas Commission on a daily, weekly basis, frankly, on just oil and gas issues and topics, one of the things that's happened over my 5 years is I get a lot of calls from local governments. Hey, you know, like Jen a couple years ago, you know, over in Adams County, want to pick your brain. We're thinking about having some sort of a committee or to create a liaison position. What does that look like? What's most important? What should we think about? And so I'm just one person from representing one county perspective, but it's just been a constant stream of folks as new governments that are new to oil and gas start seeing oil and gas come to them with planning and permitting issues and questions. They're looking for some help and guidance. So what did y'all do here? What do you do? How do you work with your citizens, that sort of thing. So we don't have all the answers, but Kathleen and I were talking, I think, gosh, it was like June or something. I don't know, sometime before you went from this lady's role to your current role, we had said we should do this at the symposium, figure this out. Should there be some sort of a mentoring thing where there's a safe place for local government to say, you know, I don't know much at all, but I know you're on a list of folks, you know, that I could just call, and can you help me sort of get my bearings as we figure out for our local government, our local social and governmental and political culture, how to navigate oil and gas in a productive manner that works in our area. And so that was just made immediate sense when Kathleen was talking about that. It just was a no-brainer that there ought to be something like a sort of a who you going to call. And so that's what we want to talk about today, and so I'll leave it at that. That's my intro.
Thank you, everybody. And I think before I open up to questions from the audience, there's a couple of things that I want to have the panel address, because I think it sort of sets some background and sets the stage for what we have currently going on. And Julie mentioned the local government designee program, and I'd love it if you'd give a little bit of an overview, and then other panelists talk a little bit, and Kirby, you touched on this, but how your local governments use that LGD program.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think that's a great place to start, and I will probably try to keep it to about a minute because I suspect that a number of you are familiar with it, and more importantly, I think the most important dialogue is between the local governments that are here to talk to you and to answer your questions. But CRGCC implemented its local government designee program in 1992. It's a unique program that CRGCC uses to gain information from local governments. It's critically important for CRGCC to be able to do its job, to have an LGD that's in place, effective, and engaged in CRGCC's process. I think that we've heard quite a bit today about the reference and the tools that CRGCC is trying to create and implement to allow for better information available to local governments and to citizens. And in that capacity, we continue to evolve what we're providing. You know, Matt kind of stole my thunder mentioning that spacing application or spacing orders are now being provided to local governments. But in addition, LGDs get specific rights, including the right to request an extension of comment periods for permits, the right to request consultation with CDPHE. in addition to specific notifications about comment periods, permit approvals, and as I mentioned, spacing orders. This is a very short list of the opportunities available to an LGD within COGCC's program. And if you have not met Mark Morton, please find him today. He's in the room. He's an invaluable resource to you to help you understand what COGCC does, what opportunities are available to you, and he will come to you and talk to you and your local government staff about our processes to try to answer questions about oil and gas development and facilitate dialogue. So I wanted to make sure that Mark was specifically identified to everybody. So while this is a statewide program that COGCC has developed, it's not mandatory, and so it relies upon local governments engaging in it. And as each local government has a different character, has a different level of oil and gas experience, there are different needs for each one of you. And I think the state is here to support however that dialogue can occur. We've seen it work a lot of different ways. I think that you have 3 examples of local governments that have done a great job of really engaging in and digging in, and these people are great resources for you too. And so if there's a capacity in which we can facilitate additional dialogue, additional training, additional education, we're here to do it. And with that, I think I'd turn it over.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll kind of go off from that. I just first wanted to give kudos to Garfield County for, I think, being a leader when it comes to outreach. You know, of course, you've got Kirby Wynn here and his team of excellent staff as an LGD, but you've also got the Energy Advisory Board over here that was formed a number of years ago that I believe are appointed by the Garfield County Commissioners and represent school districts and municipalities and so on and so forth. And then kind of an ad hoc committee out here called Community Counts, which I think is a good resource for people to turn to and who want information about oil and gas. And so I would say that Weld County has been behind the 8 ball just a little bit when it comes to some of that outreach. I'd say that, yes, we do have an LGD, and that's been in place for a long time, and that's kind of jumped around over the years. Used to be with the county attorney, then it went to the public works director, and then about 3 years ago, commissioners call me up and say, Tom, we'd like to give the LGD status to you. And I was just thrilled to death. You know, I was like, sure, that's just kind of one more thing I need. You know, I don't just do the planning side of things with being the planning director, but I'm also the building official, the floodplain administration, or administrator, and wear several different hats. So I shortly went back to the county commissioners after they bestowed that duty upon me, and I said, boy, you know, this is really taxing. You know, being in Weld County, you know, 90% of the oil production, 36% of the natural gas production. You saw all the stats with all the producing wells and the activity we had. And I said, I really need you guys to budget a division in my department so we can have full-time oil and gas staff that can really not only work with the industry like we've always had, but you know, the other duty that we have as a county is to you know, attend to the needs of the public as well. And so the commissioners did fund that. Troy Swain, you guys have got to know him. He's been on the panel here before this. We did hire Troy, so he is the full-time oil and gas liaison in the department, and he has someone underneath him to help him. And so kind of just building off that, we've kind of looked to Garfield County, and we wanted to try to form something maybe similar to an energy advisory board over in Weld County. I think we're kind of taking some baby steps towards that with the county commissioners, and looking at ways that we can be more transparent and really kind of provide that factual information, because there is a lot of misinformation about oil and gas out there, and it's kind of a way for the public to go and obtain these facts that aren't biased. They are nonpartisan. We want to, you know, get that information out there too, so it helps the citizenry when they do move into the county and they realize there's all this development. They know the resources are there to kind of help them answer their questions. And so through that, we're talking a little bit about mentoring with LGDs. We do have 31 municipalities in Weld County. And so a lot of them are quite small. They don't have the resources. They might have an LGD, they might not. I know that Troy does an excellent job when we get calls in from some of the municipalities that don't see a lot of oil and gas development, and they want to turn to somebody that is reliable and has a good background in history. So we go out there and we kind of provide, to some degree maybe, some mentoring to some of those smaller communities about the oil and gas. But I think we're getting there, and we want to continue to make improvements and get that information out there. And I think the LGD's just been great when that came in, but we're going to try to take that to the next level. So that's all I have.
Similar for Adams County, I mean, Garfield County is the precedent, and then Weld County has certainly stepped up its game, and now it's our turn. We're seeing a lot of increased development. Originally, the LGD position had been housed in the transportation department. He drove around and inspected our roadways and would make comments about roads on the Form 2A. That was okay up until around 2015 when we started seeing large multi-well pads coming in towards neighborhoods. So the planning department decided to take that role in-house and landed on me, which is really cool because I do enjoy it. It's challenging, but it's also really fun. The LGD program, I find it really helpful. It's it's a good introduction to oil and gas. It provides education not only for the LGD but for the rest of the staff at the county or municipality. So I think that's very helpful. But then it's really up to that jurisdiction to decide what they want to do with that program, whether they want to have their own full-time employee designated or whether they don't think that that's quite up to that level yet. Each jurisdiction is different. Boulder's Boulder, Weld is Weld. Everyone's got a different character. It's not a one size fits all. So the program is very moldable and whatever you want to make it. So for us, we are challenged with trying to disseminate the information that we learn from the LGD program and then give that out to all of our residents. We've got very demanding residents. So, they're very engaged, which is awesome. They're wanting to learn, but trying to get that information out there is a huge challenge. And so that's kind of the next step. After we've hired our staff, the next step is to kind of do a public information campaign and let people know how to be involved and what are their mineral rights? What is a mineral lease? Questions like that, are really important. And again, kind of going back to what Tom said is, interacting with those other municipalities within the county. City of Thornton, they're becoming more and more active. They're developing their own regulations. So it's very important to have that network of other LGDs that you can talk to. And again, also talking to the state is really important as well.
Do we have anything to add?
Yeah. So the LGD role, that's a COGCC designation, and it gives you sort of an authority or a place at the table to engage directly with the Oil and Gas Commission as well as to get ready access to any permits that come in and comment on those. So we do pretty much what was been described here. I guess one thing I would add that is, I guess, offshoot of what Jen just said is, again, as a full-time oil and gas person working for the county, one of the things that we do with the LGD role is that I really do my best, again, at the direction of the county, is to also represent and engage our 6 communities. So we have these different municipalities. Again, these folks are looking at oil and gas as other duties assigned as a town attorney or a planner, that sort of thing. So since I'm always looking at oil and gas all the time, I'm sort of have that radar out, looking out for our communities as well, to make sure that if there's something that's might be sensitive to them, that we flag it for them early and get them involved in the process. The other thing that we do is, again, Western Colorado, we're in the flyover country of the nation, I guess you'd say. And so one thing we do when we go over to Denver to participate in these rulemakings is almost every single time we'll pull together 4 to 8, sometimes 9 governments, municipal and county governments across western Colorado, to partner together. And so as an LGD and as a liaison, one thing we'll do is we'll come with, as a unified front as we can, to bring our message of what sort of rules make sense for our part of the state as well. And I think that's worked out extremely well, and it causes people to be more cohesive and to study things together and understand the issues and concerns and the benefits together.
Great. This next question, Jeff, is for you. Jeff and I actually had a conversation, I don't know how many months ago now, about this topic. And one of the things that we discussed was that for some local governments who are just diving into oil and gas issues, sometimes they don't even know what questions to ask. It can be a hugely daunting undertaking to figure out what role can the local government play and what should they be thinking about. And so, Jeff, I'd love if you'd share with some of the work that you've done with local governments, what are some of the challenges that you've seen and what considerations should local governments be taking as they're looking at?
Sure. Oftentimes when local governments are facing oil and gas development, I've seen they're often behind the 8 ball to sort of start, because unless they've sort of proactively thought about this, they've not necessarily done the education component, which is, I think, sort of the first piece that any local government needs to deal with when they're facing new oil and gas development, or they're facing a different kind of oil and gas development that we've all heard it's different now than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So education is the first component for the elected officials and for the staff, and education is in a lot of different areas. First, there needs to be education about what the local government's role is, or what is it that that set of elected officials desires for their local government, because the roles in terms of addressing oil and gas development for each community can be different. You know, does a community want to dive into having a regulatory scheme? And if they want to have a regulatory scheme over oil and gas development, how intensive do they want that scheme to be? Some local governments have a regulatory scheme that addresses transportation and truck traffic and sort of impacts to the county or the city roads, and they're comfortable, and that's enough. Other local governments want to get further involved in land use regulations over oil and gas development. They want to try to address visual impacts or noise or things that affect the look, feel, et cetera, for the neighborhoods that may be near these. So do they want to go, you know, into it a little bit further? You know, I've advised a number of different communities. One of the first things I do is we sit down with the elected officials and we sort of, okay, here's your options, and you tell staff and me where you want to land on that framework that is either regulating oil and gas or not regulating oil and gas. There's not a right or wrong answer. Another of the education components is, do you want to address oil and gas in a manner that a lot of communities, in particular municipalities, have done, which is through a contract with their operators, the memorandum of understanding process. There are a lot of communities that have used that sort of contractual approach as opposed to a regulatory approach with some good results. If you go that route, you are able to sometimes contractually do a little more than you might be able to do in a regulatory manner. So the government needs to sort of educate themselves about that component as well. Other education pieces that I see for local governments as oil and gas is approaching is you need to educate yourself about the commission's role. What is the COGCC's role? What is the local government's role? How can you work with and get involved in the LGD process? That's fundamental to making sure that what you're doing at the local level is in concert with what's happening at the state. The state has these new rules, the UMA rule that we learned about today. How can you effectively get involved in that process? So that is yet another education component. I've got 3 more. But another component for local governments and staff is to educate yourself about what operators' needs are. You should develop relationships with your operators. You need to understand what their needs are. Regulate, if you're going to get involved in regulating oil and gas, you got to understand that that's different than regulating dry cleaners or where Walmarts go. And so you've got to understand what the needs of operators are. The last two, you need to understand what your citizens' concerns are. Every jurisdiction, the concerns of the citizens are going to be a little bit different. In some jurisdictions, it's traffic and roads, and in other jurisdictions, it's large facilities coming in near homes, et cetera. So you've got to, because in order to implement either a regulatory or a contractual scheme that is going to be successful, it needs to mirror to a certain extent what the constituents are concerned about. And you also need to educate the citizens about what you can and can't do, because they come in with lofty expectations of, you know, well, just tell them to go away or tell them to do this, and that's not something local governments can do. And so, yeah, I think that's it, is understanding the neighborhood and the communities, et cetera. So those are some of the things. Oh, and then I guess the last piece, after you've done all that educating, now you got to implement. You've got to figure out, okay, now we need to, how much do we want to staff up? Do we want to have a full-time LGD? Do we want to have an inspector? Do we want to just put this in the planning department? And we also need to educate the various departments about how they go about looking at oil and gas, so that they're not overreaching or underreaching when they're dealing with a new oil and gas permit.
Anybody else want to add? Great. Thank you, Jeff. How have your local governments engaged with and communicated with the public on oil and gas issues? We've touched on this a little bit, but I think as other local governments are thinking about how to do this, undertake this education process that Jeff just sort of walked through, I think the interaction with the public becomes a very important piece, and how you create that. And I think we've got a couple of different examples of processes, and I'd love to hear what you've got going on.
Do you want to talk about what we did with Adams? I mean, we started out with outreach to both operators and to the citizen groups, and then since then, once the regulations were adopted, you've developed outreach protocols for Adams County.
Sure. In terms of, I guess we interact with our residents frequently. We send out a lot of notifications every time we receive a Form 2 or 2A notification in our email. We'll send out a letter to our residents that live within a half mile of that parcel boundary. So not the wellhead, the parcel boundary. So that's quite a few residents in some cases, up to 400 sometimes. So every time we receive a permit like that, we'll send out my information as well as the COGCC information, just let them know that it's coming down the pike. And during our permit process, we've got several points in the process where we interact with the public. We require a neighborhood meeting held by the operator, so that before the operator even comes to the county with a permit application, they have to hold a neighborhood meeting with residents within a half mile of the parcel boundary of where they're planning on developing. And then we also, after they apply for their application, we send out a request for comments to those same residents, so they can comment on that application, and we take those into consideration while we're processing that. The same notification would be applicable if we ever took an application to a public hearing. So a lot of these residents actually oftentimes get tired of how many times we are notifying them, but you know, we want to make sure that we over notify rather than under notify. And I guess one other way that we've been interacting with residents, or at least me, for the past 2 years, I have weekly phone calls with a specific group of residents, just so they can have a pulse on what's going on in the county, and likewise for what's going on in the community. So they're our point of contact, so they can disseminate all that information. They've actually established a very large network of, you know, they have a website and email mailing, so they can disseminate a lot of information that I would like to through their network, and so that's actually helped us a lot. And we do want to establish a public information campaign at some point, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I think talk a little bit, or elaborate a little bit on what Jen was saying. As I mentioned before, after the commissioners funded this little division for oil and gas within my department, and we hired Troy, and again, we wanted to kind of ramp up our efforts with public outreach. Troy and I started maybe a couple of years ago, and we have to pick this back up again a little bit, but we would do these oil and gas 101 forums throughout the county. County's quite large. It's about 4,000 square miles. So we kind of carved it up a little bit and sent out a bunch of flyers, and Troy and I would just meet with the public, people that came in that wanted to understand oil and gas a little bit more. Of course, sometimes you had people that came in and they really understood oil and gas, and you're kind of like preaching to the choir. But we were kind of really looking forward to meeting some folks that really didn't quite understand oil and gas and those impacts, and how we could provide and disseminate some of that factual information that I talked about before. And then, kind of just to go off of, something over here on that ad hoc group that I mentioned with community counts, maybe explore something like that, not just in Weld County, but maybe along the Front Range, or at least part of the northern part of the state, where there's other maybe counties or municipalities that want to get in and do some of that information sharing for those that want to turn to somebody that has that resource of that information. I think we understand oil and gas pretty well in Weld County. But we're certainly not experts, and we always try to go out there and get the best type of information. So.
Okay. Kirby?
Okay, just briefly, we spend a lot of resources and time and strategy to how to engage our community. One of the key things that we do is, like we've got Karis folks here, they're a good example. When they came to town, so to speak, we invited them in to come visit with staff and sit down with our county commissioners and just say, hi, this is us, this is what we got going on. Our county commission will kind of give them some stories and some history and explain or ask of these new operators, or put on some expectations on what they ought to do, including community meetings and outreach and things that we think would be really successful, to allow them to be successful, allow our citizens to be engaged and informed, and develop relationships right off the bat with these operators. So we do a lot of things to foster where our operators can have an immediate and sustained relationships with the citizens that are living around where they operate. That's one key element. We do have this monthly energy advisory board. That's it plays live on Rifle TV. They say it's one of our more highest rated shows. Scary thought. And it's, you're talking a place where it's free speech reigns, and anybody can come to the microphone and say, my name's Joe, and this is what I think. And sometimes what somebody thinks is some pretty wild and woolly stuff, but these are important things to do. So we have these public forums, and our county commissioners created that by resolution. It's an advisory board, advisory to the county commissioners. They come to the commissioners with the summary of the latest concerns over the last few months, and they come to the commissioners and say, this is what's been happening at the Energy Advisory Board. Our commissioners also attend a good number of those meetings as well to see it in person. We do co-host the Northwest Oil and Gas Forum. That's a quarterly forum where it brings operators from the entire region, not just Garfield County. We advertise a lot. We do a lot of radio advertising for any kind of public forums and meetings of interest. I maintain a giant email database, as it were, to let people know about rig moves or permitting issues that might be especially important for people to know about. So I guess it's a constant sort of thing. And again, my goal is, and I'll never get there, but my cell phone is wherever anybody might want to call and reach out. They can reach me anytime, and I reach back to them. And so the key thing is that there's the timeliness of the response to people, and they know that there's people listening and reacting, responding, and trying to address issues they have. So there's myriad sort of things, but it's an everyday, ever-present sort of thing. And we do, again, try to get our citizens engaged in our permitting processes, that sort of thing. We're very transparent, and I reach out to the folks that are really going to be against a project, but we make sure they come to the table and they come to our county commissioner meetings. We put them on the email list so they see the agendas coming up in advance and they can plan ahead, because we want Garfield County they just want everyone at the table, hear all the information. It's just not a matter of just county permitting going on a path. We make sure the citizens are there to the extent we can.
Great. So I have one more question for the panel, and also, and I want to open it up to the audience and really get your thoughts on this question as well. When it comes to sort of a mentorship program and local governments interacting with each other, what ideas do you have for what kind of structure that might look like? We've talked a little bit about sort of offline. Is there a role the state can play? Can we engage representatives from the Colorado Municipal League or Colorado Counties Inc. or some of those trade organizations who work pretty closely with local governments? But from your perspective, how would we make this available? How do we get the word out, and how do we set up a structure potentially for some kind of mentorship program?
think to start, one thing that I would say it ought not be, and I think the director will appreciate this, is I don't think it ought to be facilitated by the commission. They don't want to facilitate that relationship, and I think it would be more successful if it was CCI, CML, the Energy Office, some other non-regulatory entity that would be there to shepherd that mentoring relationship between the various local governments. And I didn't have a chance to call our contacts at CML or CCI, so I don't know what they think about that. So I apologize.
They're not here. We can put it on
and they're
them.
not here, so let's just say they're going to do it. But I think local governments could turn to their LGDs, and that probably makes some sense as terms of that might be the representative for this mentorship group. But it could be quarterly gatherings, it could be an email listserv, it could be a repository of what folks are doing, Adams County's regulations, Garfield's, take all the regulations and put them in a box, take the MOUs and put them in a box. Some of that's already been done. There was after the task force, I forgot the group that did it, but all the MOUs are already in one place online, and you can go find them. But folks may not know that. And so sharing that information as well is something that, it's information sharing. And it's an ability for local governments to not just haphazardly know that Kirby might be the guy to call, but instead could hit send to a number of other local governments who could then respond back. I mean, we do this with municipal attorney listservs and other things, and so that's how I would start that discussion.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't have too much to add to that. I'm always about leveraging resources and taking advantage of all those opportunities out there. We've got a wealth of information and people that sit up here on this panel and of course in this room that have a good understanding about oil and gas. So I would say if there's an opportunity where a lot of the jurisdictions could come together and share experiences. Yes, oil and gas in Weld County is different than oil and gas in Boulder, or oil and gas in Larimer, or even in Adams, or to our eastern counties like Morgan County, and so on and so forth. So I don't think we should be afraid to come together and just talk about, maybe the issues that are going on, the pros and the cons, and maybe that's what kind of spawns a little bit of this mentoring too that could take place.
I would absolutely agree, and I would say that, gathering and meeting people face to face really helps break down a lot of the barriers that I'm sure a lot of the newer LGDs and newer jurisdictions might find. They may not want to approach someone they don't know, or, they don't want to go to Weld County because they're not Weld County or whatever. So, I mean, it would be really helpful to have everyone in one place so we can all share our experiences. Absolutely.
Anything to add?
Just a couple thoughts. I mean, mostly what I want to hear to answer that question is really from out here in the audience, because what would work for you? Just one thought I have. Again, just working with people, and I cold call people all the time. I'm definitely not shy about saying, I'm a dummy, I need help. And I've called Jeff, I've called lots of people before they ever knew me, and I'm trying to figure something out. But not everybody's that way, and I just know that. And just your average person is just going to, I really want to call somebody I know, or that they expect me to call. And so for me, it's just some kind of a process where it's just obvious that this person is just kind of waiting for your call and is going to be pleasant and happy to say, let me check on that, let me get some information for you, here's some people you can get connected to. So whatever that looks like, where it gets housed, I agree, probably not in a regulatory agency, but I want to hear really from this audience myself is what could that look like and how would it work for you where you'd utilize it.
Great. Let's open it up to the audience. Don't all jump up at once.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, so what I'd like to hear from you guys is what kind of mentorship program, what kind of structure would work for you? What do you need to feel comfortable to engage with other local governments as you have questions?
Hi, Chuck Hall from Battlement Mesa, and as it goes from the rules in the COGCC, counties, municipalities, and special districts can have LGDs. But since I'm from Battlement Mesa, we're a large unincorporated area, and I have to look to Kirby, but there's really nobody that is there to express the concerns of the citizens within that unincorporated sort of like city. So how do we do that? And I know Julie sent me a letter that said, I used to be, but I'm no longer an LGD. And it's like, to me, that those citizens aren't really representative, and it goes back to the rule that the COGCC has.
Anybody want to take that? I mean, I think I appreciate your concern, and I think that when we talk about a mentorship program in this context, I think this is something that would be in addition to the LGD program, and I think it's something separate than just accessing the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, but really using the resources that we have among other local governments to help deal with some of these issues. And I don't think it should be exclusive to just the LGDs. I think it can be something that can be available to representatives of other communities in different forms, certainly as well.
I just add, I agree. There are a lot of unpopulated, unincorporated areas around Colorado. He brings up a really good point. At one level, it's like, well, that's what a representative government is. If you're an unincorporated county, your county representative is your representative. But that's just not the same. You have a community, you have a local culture. It's different from another part of the same county. So that's a fair common question, is how do you have some sort of access through that?
I guess I have the microphone at this moment. I'm Jeff Comstock from Moffett County. I've actually I began my local governmental designation with Brian Mackey when he was head of the Oil and Gas Commission years ago, and it was about, I think, 2001 or so. And Moffett County has used that local governmental designee position in a much more I'd say maybe on the ground functioning way when it comes to drilling wells, when it comes to questions about royalty payments, when it comes to questions about leasing. Leasing is a huge issue in Moffett County because we're always going through this cycle of boom and bust about actual leasing. We don't have huge producing fields like what's being discussed on stage right now, and so the leasing effort and the local governmental designee questions that come in on that are just phenomenal. In fact, I've used Jane Stanzik for years on technical questions. And so I guess to answer the question about how to work a network in this, I go back to James Kent's presentation yesterday about how to really effectively engage your community. And if you remember, the informal network was far more powerful than the formal network. And I guess I'm sitting here to encourage the group maybe to formalize a list of names for people to call and who are going to be that eager voice at the other end of the phone that you talked about, Kirby, but to not go overly formal with it and to really encourage as questions come up that have specialty in the differences of each of these counties, to actually draw on those. And when earlier the discussion came up about having like a regular meeting, and all I could think of is the stuff Mark Morton pushes all the time, where we have these gatherings. I don't know if it's maybe twice a year, Mark, I can't remember, but that formal system exists kind of through Mark's position. And so I'd encourage you to really look at the informal network to empower the people to go, an information source for people to go to. So there's my comment.
Just real briefly, and these other folks, brighter than I am, have brighter ideas, I'm sure, but what you mentioned about the informal and this list of people, and that's a great idea. And again, not to throw it into a regulatory agency's place, but I mean, it's a publicly online. Every LGD in the state is listed there, so anybody could access that. A local government could do that and just send out this informal list. Say, by the way, you're an LGD. Here's 17 people, and here's what you could have if you want to call one of them. Mark could send that out with his LGD newsletters on occasion. Again, not to put ownership of the state, but just to remind people, hey, there's an informal opportunity. If you ever feel like you need help, here's some people and here's the topics they might help you with. I mean, that's something like that that just keeps putting that information periodically in front of the LGDs across the state might help.
I just wanted to add a quick comment. I'm Troy Swain from Weld County. When Tom and I, we put together these open houses, I quickly found out that they weren't very well attended, or they were attended by fringe people in the community. But what I found is it's probably true of any small community or anyone trying to run, if someone was trying to run for office, is go visit the senior centers, because I had a lot of follow-up contacts from doing that. So every year I try to hit all the senior centers that'll have me in the county. And that's been a real good idea. And I think it also touches on that informal network, because they remember you, they keep your card, they talk to their relatives, they talk to people at church, and et cetera. And we also will do direct outreach. Somebody has questions, I'll go to your house and answer them. If you have a permit that's pending and there's a comment period, I'll go to your house on the last day of the comment period and help you fill it out or enter it. And we have a lot of elderly property owners out there that don't understand, and I think a lot of landmen struggle with their communications as well. You know, and we've got people who aren't comfortable with computers, so complaints and commenting via computer processes don't serve them that well. So I do end up going to the houses sometimes. There's also people out there, some people don't read as well as others. You know, there's a huge variety of people out in the community, and I think you have to focus your efforts based on what you find. So.
Yes, hello, pardon me. My name is Brian Mackey, and I'm with SRC Energy. And I was a former director of the State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission a while back. And I was around in 1991 when the LGD program was first put into rule with the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I believe it was called CCI rulemaking. There was a great deal of concern among some local governments, particularly Garfield County. They were right at the tip of the spear back in those days. I think the planning director's name was Mark Bean, and he was great to work with. So Garfield County definitely has a long history with this program, but it's been really gratifying to see what this has grown into and what a powerful resource it is. And I would strongly encourage any and all local governments to take great advantage of this program. And I think it may be known by most people in this room, but maybe not, but this is the only program of its kind in the United States, to my knowledge. So, you know, we need to use it to its fullest extent and enjoy having it. And those are my comments.
I know we are, do we have one more?
Mark Morton.
Hi, I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I am Mark Morton. I'm the local government liaison, so I am a resource to all the local governments. If you need to find out which local governments are using MOUs, give me a call. If you need to find out which ones have full-time LGDs, and there's about 5 of those, feel free to let me know. And we do have a series of trainings that are available, which we've given over the past few years. Over 350 people have attended those. Now we're moving more to a small group, town by town kind of meeting training to initiate folks. I call it LGD orientation meetings, doing one next week in Milliken. But the operators also have some responsibility to push out the LGDs that they work with. Part of that is that 30-day notification letter that they send to people that are within 1,000 feet of proposed development. And it's good to make those letters that go out clear, easily understood by citizens, so that they don't get bogged down in industry language too much. But make sure the point of the letter is to inform folks that, yes, you can meet with the operators to discuss your concerns. So, but thanks for letting me share that view.
we have gone over our allotted time, so I apologize. I would encourage all of you to continue to think about this. And as you are providing feedback on the conference, that would be probably a good place to submit some of your thoughts and ideas, and we can continue to work through this. I think having a program that sort of builds on that structure of the LGD, but also makes sure that we have it accessible to people who don't have an LGD or haven't explored that or can't have one, but making sure that this network and connection for information is available to anybody who needs it, I think is really ultimately how this is going to be most useful. So thank you to my panelists. I think this was a great conversation. Thank you to the audience. We look forward to hearing more ideas.